Okay, I think this is working. Um, I am going to try to get my thoughts down about writing about China. I'm feeling a it's too big. I don't know where to start. So, like I did with Amsterdam, I'm gonna do some oral history and hopefully from there, like take the transcript and be able to turn it into text that way. So doing the oral tradition thing to lead me to organizing how to write about China. So I thought of, what jumps out at me when I think about it. And for some reason, um, I'm gonna call it the Buddha in the phone booth because you never see homeless people in China. When I first arrived in 2004, there was an old homeless lady who kept sleeping in the front of all these Chinese buildings. There's plants and planters, they always have greenery around buildings. And this old lady kept sleeping, in the planters. So every morning when we showed up for school, we often would see the security guards rousting her up and out. So, like I said, you really do not see homeless people in China because the government gives everyone an apartment. Um, that's another story. But like I said, seeing homeless people is quite unusual. But I worked in an office that was near the Wanfujing Shopping Center, which is near Tiananmen. It's kind of the center of the city. And I would have to take the subway there. And because I struggled with the Chinese subway during rush hour, because it's jam-packed, the school let me, instead of working 8 to 5, they let me work 7 to 4, so that I was one of the earliest ones in the office, and that was fine with them. And then I could take the subway, and it was not rush hour, and that was fine. I can deal with the subway as long as it's not packed. But so I would walk to school from the subway. It was maybe a 5-minute walk. And there was a McDonald's next to the building where my school was. And I never eat McDonald's. I just, just haven't got in the habit. Now, occasionally when I am overseas, there are times when you crave a burger. So yeah, I mean, I will get a quarter pounder with cheese, but McDonald's also has coffee. In China back then, their Starbucks were not everywhere. So, knowing where good coffee places are, you register that on your map. Um, by even in 2004, nobody was using phone booths, but there were still a few around, but there was no phone in them. It was just like the little um, plastic awning thing that you would stand, if you were going to use the phone. But there was a phone booth, and it was outside the McDonald's. And but like I said, it was never used, so it's just one of those things you didn't really notice. But I started noticing a guy sleeping in the phone booth. And like I said, you really didn't see people doing that, so I did notice him, and he looked homeless. He would take his shoes off and stick his feet kind of out of the phone booth, and his feet were dirty and he was dirty, which is unusual. You really don't see that very often. So I kind of assumed mentally ill because he was young, 20-ish. He could also be from the countryside who has come to Beijing to try and find work in construction. This was during the building boom. So I started noticing him, this would be like at 6:45 in the morning, and he was always asleep. And one morning I was walking to school, and it was warmish, so it had to be late spring, early fall. But I decided I wanted an egg McMuffin. Now that is something I will get from McDonald's. So I saw the guy in the booth, he was there, and I went in McDonald's to get an egg McMuffin and a coffee. And as I'm ordering, I ordered 2 egg McMuffins, a coffee, and a juice. And when I left, I he was still asleep, but I put the Egg McMuffin and the juice in the phone booth with him. And then I took mine and I went on to school. And I'm trying to remember. Oh, I had to run an errand or something, but it would be like an hour or so after that. I probably was out of cigarettes or something, and there was like a shop there, so I was doing a run like that, and I noticed that the phone booth was empty. But the damn wrappers from the Egg McMuffin, he didn't pick up his trash, but he clearly ate it and was gone. So I thought, okay, that's fine. And so a couple days later, same thing. He's sleeping in the phone booth, and I go in and get an Egg McMuffin for me, and I get one for him, and I leave it again. Only this time he woke up. I don't know if he was waiting for me or what, but it was one of those moments where he sat up and I felt, gosh, kind of a weird, a thief in reverse. It was just a weird. I just didn't know how to cope. One, I could not speak Chinese, and this person, it's hard to describe, but I just said Zhao, which is morning. And he said ni hao. And then he said 谢谢, which means thank you in Chinese. And I just nodded my head and, went and did my errand or whatever. But when I came out of the shop, getting cigarettes or whatever, he was sitting in the booth. And it's just the way the sun was shining, it was kind of going through the trees, but like a beam of sunlight struck that phone booth. And he's sitting there, sitting up with this huge grin on his face. And he reminded me of a Buddha. Now, I'm going to have to do some digging, but a Buddha in an abandoned phone booth, and I'm perceiving him in a homeless situation. This is a karma thing. This is why the story stays with me, is my confusion 25 years later about I don't question why I helped him. I was feeding myself. So there's just something inside me that when you see someone who's probably hungry and you are feeding yourself, and I could afford it, of course, it's like, 10 RMB or whatever. But that's my first story from China. The next one is going to be about the old homeless man who made himself a tent in the winter. He attached it to a very high-end shop. This is in the bridal area. There are shops with bridal dresses and stuff. But every night he would put up his tent because there was like a heat duct from the building. So it was just one of those lucky corners. And he would make this tent every night. And for some reason, he had like a kid's tricycle, not a old people's tricycle, but like a kid's tricycle. And I noticed people leaving oranges and bread. And so I started, I mean, this is Spring Festival, and the mandarin oranges are for sale on every street corner. And so I would buy them almost every day. So if I had leftovers from the day before, I used to keep my change in China, because the little coins, I never bothered with them, but I would save them and I put them in these little plastic bags. And so I would throw my change into bags of oranges, but I would leave them for him there's a tricycle, people would hang bags on the tricycle. And I mean, and it's almost like those of us, and again, this is right outside the subway station. So those of us who would walk past this homemade tent every morning, and again, I told you I was very early. This is before, the city really wakes up. But it was just the early birds out on the sidewalk. But he always had that tent down before 8 a.m. and 8 a.m. is the earliest Chinese people will go to work. Most of them are there at 9, but between 8 and 9. So he's another fond memory, but this is within like 500 meters. The old homeless man at the bridal shop was only 500 meters away from the Buddha in the phone booth. But those are the only two home, and then the old lady that was sleeping in the bushes in front of the building. Those are the only three homeless people that I actually remember seeing and ended up interacting with in my own kind of weird way. So I'm trying to think of the year. That would be about 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. Okay, that is it.